Severe modern droughts are rewriting the history books before our eyes. Ancient riverbeds, silent for thousands of years, are suddenly speaking. Their receding waters are pulling back a veil on entire lost civilizations, exposing secrets that have been submerged for. This is the powerful paradox of our time. The same climate extremes threatening our future are becoming unexpected keys to our deepest past. By the end of this exploration, you will understand what these resurfaced societies reveal about human resilience and the urgent choices we face today. We will see how a vanished river might explain the Indus Valley's transformation and why the intricate canals of Angkor now lie bare. What does it feel like to watch your own history emerge from the mud? A reservoir in Spain lies almost empty, its cracked mud flats baking under the sun. But where water once was, a new shape emerges. Rows of massive, lichen-covered stones stand in a silent circle, a monument unseen for 50 years. This is the Dolmen of, a prehistoric tomb complex submerged when a dam was built in the 1960s. Its sudden but a direct and startling consequence of our changing climate. This is drought archaeology, a field born from necessity and profound irony. As historic droughts lower water tables and shrink reservoirs worldwide, they are accidentally performing the largest archaeological survey in modern history, exposing landscapes lost for generations. The process is both simple and devastating. Prolonged water scarcity drains the artificial lakes created by 20th-century dams, pulling back the curtain on valleys that were intentionally flooded to create water security for growing populations. In other regions, shrinking natural rivers and lakes reveal riverbeds and shorelines where ancient people once lived, worked, and built. For hydrologists, it is a crisis measured in cubic meters of water lost. For archaeologists, it is a bittersweet race against time. They are granted a fleeting, unplanned opportunity to study a perfectly preserved site, one that was protected from looters and erosion by its watery tomb, but only because of an environmental emergency. The window of access is terrifyingly brief. Once the rains return, the water rises, and the past is submerged once more, perhaps for another half-century, perhaps forever. This phenomenon is now global. In the American Southwest, receding waters of Lake Mead have revealed everything from sunken fishing boats to the foundations of historic Mormon settlements. In Iraq, drought-stricken reservoirs on the Tigris River have uncovered a 3,400-year-old palace from the empire. Its walls adorned with intricate murals still bearing traces of bright red and blue paint. Each site tells a different story. We find the pragmatic footprints of daily life, like old roads and farmsteads. We rediscover places of profound spiritual significance, like temples and burial sites. And we uncover the ambitious infrastructure of past societies, their canals, bridges, and defensive walls now lying bare in the open air. The reappearance of Spain's stone circle, often called the Spanish Stonehenge, offers a poignant example. This megalithic structure, likely a communal tomb and ceremonial site from around 5,000 years ago, was known to locals before the valley was flooded. For decades, it existed only in old photographs and memories. Its return is a powerful, visible reminder of a cycle far older than the dam itself. It prompts a difficult but necessary question. What does it mean to learn from history when the very method of its revelation is a symptom of a planet in distress? We are being handed the pieces of our past, even as we struggle to secure our future. With this complex reality in mind, we can look deeper to where the most profound revelations are occurring, not in reservoirs but in the ancient. Vanished riverbeds that once cradled humanity's first great cities. The faint, ghostly grid of a city emerges from the dust, a blueprint drawn not by architects but by the absence of water. Across the plains of India and Pakistan, extreme heat and prolonged drought are doing more than just stressing modern farms. They are revealing the lost arteries of one of humanity's first great societies. The Indus Valley Civilization. For over a century, we have known of its remarkable cities, Harappa, and with their advanced urban planning and mysterious script. But the droughts of recent decades are forcing a dramatic rewrite of this civilization's story, centered on a river that vanished from the landscape ago, the legendary. Ancient Sanskrit texts describe thee as a mighty, life-giving river flowing from the mountains to the sea. For a long time, many considered it a mythological place, a river of poetry rather than geography. But the view from space, combined with evidence on the parched ground, tells a different story. Satellite imagery reveals the pale, sinuous tracks of massive ancient river channels cutting across what is now the desert. Geologists like Dr. K.S. have studied the sediments in these dry beds, finding deposits of rounded pebbles and coarse sand that could only have been laid down by a powerful, perennial river system. The evidence suggests there was not a myth, but a real and colossal river. Likely a major tributary of the Indus that began to fail around 4,000 years ago due to tectonic shifts and changing monsoon patterns. This single revelation reconfigures our entire mental map of this ancient society. It was not just an Indus Valley civilization, it was likely a twin river culture, a parallel to Mesopotamia's Tigris and Euphrates. The bulk of its known settlements, over 2/3 of them, are not clustered along the Indus, but are found sitting along the ghostly course of the lost. This was a civilization built on two pillars of water. The drought-exposed channels help explain the civilization's astonishing spread and uniformity across such a vast region. They were connected by a network of waterways, not just barren land. The receding waters are also exposing the ingenious ways they managed their precious resource. At the site of Salti, arid island in Gujarat, a landscape now gripped by severe drought, archaeologists can finally appreciate the scale of the city's water conservation. They see a complex system of cascading reservoirs, channels, and dams carved into the rock, designed to capture every drop of seasonal rain. In other dried-up sections of the ancient river plain, surveys reveal not just cities, but the infrastructure of survival, networks of deep, brick-lined wells that tapped into groundwater, and elaborate bath complexes that suggest water had both practical and profound ritual significance. All of this leads to a haunting reflection. If there was the lifeblood of this widespread society, what happened when it began to fade? The river's decline was likely a slow process, stretching over centuries. As its flow diminished and became seasonal, then vanished entirely, the economic and social bonds that held the civilization together would have strained. Communities would have faced impossible choices: to dig deeper wells, to move closer to the remaining Indus, or to disperse into smaller, more mobile groups. The civilization did not end with a sudden collapse, but with a gradual transformation, a dispersal into regional cultures. The loss of the did not erase the people, but it fundamentally rearranged their world, proving that their greatest strength, their mastery of a dual river system, also contained the seed of their eventual fragmentation. This pattern of brilliant adaptation, followed by vulnerability to a shifting climate, is not unique to the Indus Valley. To see it on an even grander, more theatrical scale, we must look to the jungles of Southeast Asia. From the jungles of Southeast Asia, we travel to the very cradle of civilization itself. A satellite view over southern Iraq today reveals a landscape in distress, where extreme drought has shriveled the great marshes and left the earth cracked and pale. Yet in this modern aridity, an ancient blueprint has emerged. Etched into the exposed desert floor is a vast, intricate spiderweb of lines, a network of canals and waterways so expansive it resembles the circuitry of a machine. This is the ghostly signature of Mesopotamia, left by the Sumerians and Babylonians, who first mastered the art of large-scale river taming. The droughts are not just revealing lost cities, they are exposing the lost rivers themselves, showing us that the Tigris and Euphrates we know today are not the rivers that built empires. Their courses have writhed across the plain like snakes over and the dried-up channels now visible are the very arteries that once pulsed with life, allowing grain to grow and cities to rise. Archaeologist Dr. Jennifer has studied these patterns from the ground and the air. She describes how these exposed irrigation networks reveal a story of breathtaking agricultural intensity and profound social organization. To carve a canal that stretches for dozens of miles, moving water from a river to distant fields requires a unified purpose. It requires surveyors, engineers, and the labor of thousands, all directed by a central authority. Each visible canal is therefore a fossilized imprint of power and collective will. The scientific insights go far beyond just mapping. Researchers are now taking samples of silt from these long, dry riverbeds and abandoned field systems. By analyzing the layers, they can read a detailed environmental history, like the pages of a book written in mud and pollen. This silt analysis is dramatically rewriting our timeline for one of Mesopotamia's greatest challenges, soil salinization. We used to think this process, where irrigation water evaporates and leaves behind salt that eventually poisons the soil, was a slow creep that contributed to the decline of Sumerian city-states. The new evidence suggests it happened in sharper, more devastating waves, aligned with periods of drought and poor river management. The land did not gently fade, it periodically crashed, forcing abrupt changes in where and how people farmed. The droughts are also exposing the empire's economic veins. At the ancient city of famously excavated a century ago, the surrounding land is now so dry that archaeologists can conduct new, wide-scale surveys. They are finding the foundations of ancient harbors and river ports, now stranded far from any water. These ports tell us that was not a city isolated in the desert, but a bustling hub connected by waterways that have since completely vanished or shifted course. Each silent harbor, sitting on dry, cracked earth, marks a once thriving trade route that brought timber, stone, and luxury goods into the heart of the civilization. This brings us to a powerful, reflective question. The ancient Mesopotamians, with their bronze tools and vast labor forces, reshaped their rivers with an ambition that defined their world. Today, modern nations engineer the same Tigris and Euphrates with concrete mega dams and diversion projects. Both endeavors seek to control nature for human benefit. But looking at the ghostly canals now exposed by drought, what can our modern projects learn from this ancient example? The Mesopotamian system was ultimately vulnerable because it was designed for a specific, stable reality, a predictable river flow, and a reliable climate. When those conditions changed, as they always do, the very complexity of their engineering became a liability. The canals silted up, the salt accumulated, and the centralized society that built them struggled to adapt. Their story is not one of ignorance, but of brilliant adaptation meeting its ecological limit. It is a profound lesson in humility, showing that the greatest human achievements are often locked in a delicate conversation with the environment. And when that conversation breaks down, even the mightiest river-based civilization can find its harbors stranded in the dust and its fields falling silent. This pattern of innovation, overreach, and vulnerability leads us to a final, haunting discovery, where a drought revealed not just a lost city, but a forgotten chapter of human ambition on a truly monumental scale. The jungle canopy of Cambodia parts to reveal a geometric puzzle etched into the earth. From the air, during the dry season, the true ambition of the Khmer Empire becomes stunningly clear. Surrounding the iconic spires of Angkor Wat is not just a collection of temples, but the skeleton of a vast hydraulic machine, a city engineered for water. For centuries, this network of canals, moats, and massive reservoirs called lay hidden beneath vegetation and soil. Now, intensified seasonal droughts are pulling the water back, exposing the system's sheer scale and its ultimate vulnerability. Researchers like Dr. have used LiDAR, a laser mapping technology, to peer through the forest floor. They discovered that Angkor was a sprawling, low-density metropolis, its suburbs connected by a capillary network of waterways stretching over 1,000 square kilometers. This was not merely decoration, it was the empire's beating heart. The system served three masterful purposes. It captured monsoon rains in gigantic reservoirs, like the West, which is 8 kilometers long and 2.2 kilometers wide. It distributed that stored water across the landscape to support intensive rice agriculture, feeding a population that may have approached 1 million. And it managed the annual flood pulse of the nearby Sap Lake, attempting to turn a volatile environment into one of predictable abundance. The dry, exposed banks of these features are yielding new clues about their construction and their failure. At the west, low water levels have revealed intricate earthen embankments and sluice gate foundations, showing a mastery of civil engineering. Yet in other channels, archaeologists find gates that appear to have been repeatedly repaired or rebuilt, and basins choked with thick layers of sediment. This silt tells a story of maintenance losing a battle against time and nature. The reflective question is profound. Did the Khmer Empire fall because of climate or because of the limits of its own brilliant design? The evidence points to a devastating convergence. Tree ring studies from the region indicate a series of severe droughts in the 14th and 15th centuries, interspersed with periods of intense monsoon flooding. This 1-2 punch would have been catastrophic for Angkor's precise water calculus. Prolonged drought would have emptied and parched the rice paddies. When the fierce rains finally returned, they would have washed torrents of sediment into the carefully maintained canals, clogging the very arteries of the city. The system, designed for a stable climate rhythm, could not cope with such violent swings. The empire's elite, whose authority was divinely linked to controlling water, would have seen their power evaporate along with the reservoirs. This was not a sudden collapse, but a gradual unraveling. The population likely dispersed to more flexible, smaller-scale communities along the Mekong River. The great stone temples remained, but the water-powered metropolis that supported them faded back into the jungle, its grand canals becoming mere shadows in the soil. The Khmer Empire's story teaches us that the most sophisticated infrastructure can become a civilization's greatest liability when the environment it was built for changes. This leads us from empires that etched their dreams in stone and water to societies so thoroughly lost that they slipped entirely into the realm of legend. The American Southwest holds a different kind of water story, written not in sprawling canals, but in the intimate fingerprints of a community. Here, along the sun-baked cliffs and dry washes of the Colorado Plateau, the ancestral built a civilization in a land where water was never guaranteed. Modern drought is now pulling back another layer, exposing the delicate, ingenious ways they coaxed life from the desert.
As the San River and its tributaries shrink, they are revealing hand-built irrigation ditches that snake toward silent cliff dwellings, and ancient agricultural terraces perched above now intermittent streams. These are not the grand monuments of an emperor, but the practical, communal work of families adapting to a marginal world. The story of their success and their eventual departure is literally written in the trees. Dendrochronologists, scientists who study tree rings, have constructed a precise climate record going back over 1,000 years. By examining the growth patterns in ancient wood from these sites, they can pinpoint periods of severe, decade drought. These, like one in the late 1300s, align perfectly with archaeological evidence of large-scale community reorganization and the abandonment of famous sites like those in Mesa Verde. The droughts are revealing the physical evidence of that struggle. In recently dry arroyos, researchers find networks of small check dams, low stone walls built across gullies to slow rainwater, capture precious silt, and create pockets of fertile soil. They uncover grid gardens, plots defined by lines of stones that protected young plants from the wind and retained moisture. Each discovery is a lesson in micro-scale water management. A clear example comes from the creek area. As water levels dropped, surveys revealed a complex, community-wide system of canals and diversion structures that distributed creek water across fields and into reservoirs. This was niche construction on a human scale, the deliberate and cumulative modification of a local environment to make it more hospitable. Generation by generation, they learned to read the land, to plant where water would naturally gather, and to build where the canyon walls offered shelter. Theirs was a deep, hard-won knowledge of place. This leads to a quiet, powerful question. The ancestral achieved a remarkable sustainability in an arid land for centuries, yet even their profound adaptation met a limit when the climate shifted too far. They did not vanish, but they changed, migrating to where water was more reliable and reorganizing into new community patterns. Their legacy is not one of failure, but of resilience and flexibility. In the face of a changing environment, they made a choice that many great river societies could not. They chose to move, to transform rather than cling to a place that could no longer support them. Their story brings us from vast, engineered riverscapes to the intimate relationship between a community and its local spring. It shows that water security has always been fragile, and that the most enduring solutions are often about flexibility, not just control. A dry riverbed is a history book, but its pages are written in mud, stone, and pollen. As we walk across these newly exposed landscapes, we are not just looking at dirt, we are looking at a layered archive, and modern science has finally learned how to read it. This is not a task for archaeologists alone, but for a team of detectives including geologists, chemists, and climate scientists, each with a unique tool to decode the past. Their work transforms a silent, cracked riverbank into a vivid narrative of life, climate, and change. The first tool is literally a core sample, a long cylinder of earth extracted from a dried-up lakebed or an ancient floodplain. To a scientist, this column of sediment is a timeline. Each distinct layer represents a different era, deposited by floods, wind, or slow, calm waters. By analyzing the texture, color, and composition of these layers, can reconstruct the river's behavior over centuries. A thick band of coarse gravel speaks of a period of powerful, fast-moving floods. A layer of fine, organic rich silt tells of quieter times when the river gently overflowed its banks, nourishing nearby fields. The very presence of these layers, now exposed by drought, gives us a direct physical record of wet and dry cycles that written history could never capture. But the real magic happens when we look closer at the microscopic evidence trapped within that mud. Take pollen, for instance. When scientists wash and examine sediment samples, they find thousands of ancient pollen spores perfectly preserved. These tiny grains are like botanical fingerprints. A high concentration of pollen from domesticated wheat or barley tells us that farms were nearby. A sudden shift to pollen from hardy desert shrubs indicates a drying trend, a time when agriculture retreated and the land reclaimed itself. Similarly, the shells of tiny snails and other microorganisms, now found in the dried mud, act as ancient climate stations. By measuring specific isotopes in their shells, researchers can determine the chemical signature of the water they lived in, revealing whether the river was fed by steady mountain glaciers or fickle monsoon rains. On the ground, other technologies map what we cannot see. Ground-penetrating radar, or GPR, is like giving the Earth an X-ray. Scientists drag a sled over a dry, flat plain that once lay under a reservoir. The device sends radar pulses into the ground, and the reflections reveal buried walls, foundations, and even old irrigation ditches, creating a detailed map of a hidden settlement without ever lifting a shovel. For dating, a technique called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL, is revolutionary. It allows scientists to determine when a grain of sand was last exposed to sunlight. By testing sand from the banks of a desiccated river channel, they can pinpoint the exact century that channel was active and flowing, finally giving absolute dates to landscapes we once could only guess about. We can see this interdisciplinary toolkit in action along the river system in India, the very region linked to the lost. Here in the parched river channels, teams combine sediment coring, OSL dating, and ceramic analysis. They might find a layer of fertile silt containing barley pollen, dated to 4,000 years ago, and just above it, a scatter of broken pottery. Then, higher up in the sequence, the silt turns to wind-blown sand and the pottery disappears. This physical sequence tells a clear story, a thriving riverside community, followed by the river's failure, and finally, the silence of abandonment. The ground itself is confessing its history. So what stories are written in the earth beneath our feet, stories we normally walk over without a second thought? These scientific methods allow us to listen. They let us distinguish a drought caused by nature from one worsened by human hands, to see the moment a river changed course, or the season a community planted their last successful crop. This is not speculation, it is evidence built grain by grain, isotope by isotope. By reading these dry riverbeds, we are building a scientific foundation solid enough to answer the most difficult question of all: what finally causes a society to let go of a place it called home for 1,000 years? The triggers of collapse are rarely simple, but they are often written in the water or the devastating lack of it. The same headline echoes across 4,000 years. A modern news article details a city rationing water, while a clay tablet from ancient Mesopotamia pleads, "The rains did not come, the fields yield no grain." This shared lament reveals the central, haunting truth emerging from these dry riverbeds. Drought was not a mere inconvenience for these civilizations. It was the ultimate stress test, a catalyst that exposed every hidden crack in their social foundation. To say a drought caused a collapse is far too simple. The real story is how environmental shock interacts with a society's specific vulnerabilities, pushing it toward either transformation or fragmentation. Historian Joseph offers a crucial lens here, discussing how societies grow in complexity to solve problems. They build bureaucracies, armies, and vast irrigation networks. This complexity brings great benefits, but it also carries a constant cost in energy and resources.
When a severe, prolonged drought strikes, it reduces the very surplus that fuels that complex system. The return on investment for maintaining grand canals or feeding a large priestly class suddenly plummets. The society faces a crisis of legitimacy, where the institutions designed to ensure stability can no longer deliver their promised security. We can see this play out in a dramatic global event known as the 4.2 event. Around 2200 years before the Common Era, tree rings and ice cores from across the world tell a story of a sudden, severe shift toward aridity that lasted for centuries. Its impacts were catastrophic but selective. In Egypt, the Nile's annual flood failed repeatedly. The resulting famine and political instability shattered the Old Kingdom, the age of the Great Pyramid builders. The pharaoh's divine guarantee of the flood was broken, and central authority crumbled into a period of regional rule. At the same time, far to the north, the Akkadian Empire in Mesopotamia, history's first true ethnic empire, also disintegrated. Archaeological sites from this period show a layer of wind-blown silt covering abandoned cities, a literal dust bowl. Ancient texts describe people seeing the Great Plains turn to salt, and desperate families resorting to selling their children for food. The drought was the trigger, but the collapse was the result of an imperial system too rigid, too dependent on consistent agricultural tribute from its far-flung provinces to withstand such a shock. Yet not every society confronted by drought met the same fate. Their responses fell along a spectrum. On one end was adaptive migration, a strategy of flexibility. We see this with the ancestral, who chose to disperse and reorganize in new locations when their water systems failed. On the other end was systemic collapse, where the core political and economic structures fractured beyond repair, as with the Akkadians. In the middle lay societal reorganization, a painful downsizing of complexity. This might be what happened in the Indus Valley, where the integrated urban civilization dissolved, but its people and cultural knowledge persisted in smaller, more mobile village societies. The Late Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE presents the ultimate puzzle. Across the eastern Mediterranean, from Mycenaean Greece to the Hittite Empire in Anatolia and the city-states of the Levant, palatial civilizations fell within a generation. Drought is a prime suspect, with climate data indicating a period of severe aridity, but was it the sole cause? Likely, it was the knockout blow to a system already reeling from a cascade of stresses, including earthquakes, piracy, internal rebellion, and the disruption of international trade networks. The drought would have sparked famine, which spurred mass migrations of desperate sea peoples, which in turn overwhelmed the brittle, hierarchical kingdoms. Their complex, interconnected world became their Achilles heel. This history forces a deeply reflective question upon us. Our modern global civilization is the most complex in history, a fantastically interconnected machine. Does this make us more resilient or more vulnerable to a similar shock? We have global food markets and advanced weather prediction, but we also have supply chains that stretch across continents and populations utterly dependent on consistent energy and water flow. The ancient river valleys show us that resilience is not about the scale of your infrastructure, but about the flexibility of your response. Their story is not a prophecy of doom, but a stark lesson in humility. It suggests that the true discovery in these dry riverbeds is not just evidence of past failure, but a map of human ingenuity under pressure. And a warning about the fragility of even the most magnificent systems when the water finally runs dry. A cracked pot sits half buried in a dry streambed in Anatolia. Inside, archaeologists find layers of charcoal and porous stone, a simple yet effective ancient water filter designed to purify muddy river water. This single artifact is a testament to a truth now rising from the dust. Our ancestors were not passive victims of a dry world, but ingenious engineers of scarcity. As droughts pull back the water, they are revealing a lost catalog of sustainable technology, a global library of solutions carved into the earth itself. These are not just ruins, they are blueprints. Across the arid landscapes of the past, communities developed a stunning diversity of systems to capture, conserve, and convey every precious drop. In the Indian subcontinent, they built monumental stepwells, intricate inverted temples that descended deep into the earth to reach groundwater, serving as both water source and cool, communal gathering space. In the deserts of Persia and beyond, they engineered qanats, gently sloping underground tunnels that tapped into mountain aquifers and transported water for dozens of miles by gravity alone, preventing evaporation in the searing heat. On the island of Crete, the Minoans constructed elaborate conduit systems with settling tanks and parabolic curves to manage water pressure. In the city of Petra, they mastered the art of flash flood capture, carving channels and dams into the rose-red cliffs to divert sudden, violent waters into vast underground cisterns, filling enough to last a city through a year-long drought. Recent droughts in the region have exposed the full extent of these canals and reservoirs, allowing hydrologists to map their precise engineering for the first time. What they find is a design philosophy centered on working with nature, not against it. They did not fight the flash flood, they harnessed its brief, furious energy. The qanat builders understood the water table as a resource to be gently tapped, not aggressively pumped. The stepwell architects recognized that accessing water could also be a sacred, social act. Modern engineers studying these systems are often struck by their elegant efficiency. A qanat, for instance, is a self-regulating system. Its flow is determined solely by the water table level, so it cannot over-extract the aquifer. It requires no external power, just an understanding of geology and gravity. The exposure of entire, intact systems now allows for a kind of reverse engineering, where scientists can model water flow through ancient channels or calculate the storage capacity of a cistern network, quantifying the intelligence embedded in the stone. Consider the Roman aqueducts, whose iconic arches are just the final delivery system. Droughts in Italy have lowered river levels, revealing the often overlooked feeder springs and collection basins that were the true starting points. The Romans meticulously selected springs with stable, clean flows, and they engineered settling tanks to remove sediment before the long journey to the city. This holistic view, from source to tap, is a lesson in systems thinking we are relearning today. So why did so much of this profound, place-based knowledge fade from common practice? The answer often lies in a shift towards centralized, high-energy solutions. The arrival of fossil fuels and powerful pumps made it possible to ignore local water limits temporarily, to drill deeper and move water farther with immense force. The subtle, sustainable logic of the qanat, or the cistern, was overshadowed by the apparent abundance offered by technology. The knowledge didn't vanish, but it was often sidelined, preserved only in the structures themselves, waiting silently for a time when we would need to listen again. This leads us to a quiet, hopeful reflection. These drought-exposed technologies are more than historical curiosities. They are a conversation with the past about resilience. They ask us if true sustainability might involve blending our most advanced science with some of humanity's oldest, most elegant wisdom. They remind us that innovation is not always about creating something new, but sometimes about remembering something essential. And as the last of the water recedes,
These symbols left in the stone become a map, not just to lost springs, but to a more adaptable way of living on this planet. The stone altar emerges from the mud, still holding the shape of hands that placed offerings there 1,000 years ago. While we often focus on the cities and farms revealed by drought, some of the most profound discoveries are sacred, places where ancient people sought connection with forces greater than themselves. These resurfaced monuments reveal a spiritual geography, a map of belief written not in ink, but in the deliberate placement of stones where water met land. For countless cultures, rivers, springs, and lakes were never merely resources. They were living entities, deities, or portals to other realms. The confluence of two rivers was especially sacred, a place of doubled power where offerings were made and temples were built. Now, as these waters retreat, they are returning those very offerings to the light, along with the architecture of faith. Across Europe, severe drought has lowered great rivers like the Danube and the Elbe to historic levels. In their exposed banks, archaeologists and sometimes lucky bystanders are finding collections of bronze swords, intricately decorated shields, and beautifully carved figurines. These are not lost items, but intentional deposits, ritual offerings made by Celtic and Germanic peoples over 200 ago. They cast these precious objects into the water as gifts to the gods, perhaps for victory in battle, for a good harvest or safe passage. Seeing them lie on dry river gravel today feels like witnessing a suspended moment, a prayer interrupted and finally answered by the drought itself. Similarly, in the high Andes, the retreat of glacial lakes is exposing stone platforms and ceremonial structures built by pre-Columbian cultures like the. These platforms, known as were placed at the water's edge to honor mountain spirits believed to control the rain and fertility of the land. Their reappearance is a direct, physical link to a cosmology where the human, the divine, and the hydrological were inseparable. A powerful example of this spiritual re-emergence is happening at Lake Van in Turkey. As the vast lake shrinks, an entire Armenian church, known as the Church of the Virgin, has risen from the depths. Submerged when the lake was artificially raised in the 1950s, its stone walls and arches now stand fully exposed on the new shoreline. For the local community and the Armenian diaspora, its return is deeply emotional, a reconnection with a heritage that was literally submerged. It is a place of worship that physically embodies loss and resilience, its stones holding memories of both devotion and displacement. Anthropologists note that this pattern is nearly universal. Water sources were thresholds between worlds. To build a temple at a spring was to commune with the source of life itself. To bury the honored dead along a riverbank was to place them in a current of spiritual flow. The drought-exposed sites allow us to see this blueprint clearly, the ceremonial platform precisely aligned where a stream enters a larger river, the burial ground clustered around a now dry oasis. This leads to a reflective and delicate question. What is the emotional impact on descendant communities when these sacred sites suddenly return? For some, it is a moment of reclamation and profound healing, a chance to perform ceremonies at an ancestral altar for the first time in generations. For others, it is a bittersweet reminder of what was lost, both to the water long ago and now to the climate crisis that threatens their future. The sites speak of a deep, enduring relationship between people and place, a relationship that modern resource management often overlooks. When we see a stone circle in a drained reservoir or offerings in a dry riverbed, we are not just looking at archaeology, we are witnessing the physical form of gratitude, plea, and reverence. These places remind us that water was never just H2O, it was a sacred covenant. And as the waters that hid them withdraw, they ask us what we hold sacred in our own relationship with the world. This spiritual loss, written in stone and silt, finds its parallel in the tangible, everyday objects that are also coming to the surface, the quiet evidence of how ordinary people lived, worked, and ultimately faced the changing world. A child's leather sandal lies on the cracked mud, its tiny strap still tied. It was lost in the soft silt of a riverbank thousands of years ago, protected in a dark, airless tomb of wet clay, and now the drought has laid it bare in the sun. While stone altars speak of gods and empires, objects like this whisper of the ordinary, of the intimate rhythm of daily life in these lost river valleys. The true magic of drought archaeology is this sudden window into the organic world, a world that normally vanishes without a trace. In typical dry or exposed conditions, materials like wood, leather, cloth, and food rot away in decades. But when they are buried in waterlogged, oxygen-poor sediments at the bottom of a river or lake, they enter a state of suspended animation. The very mud that swallows them becomes their perfect preservative. Now, as that mud dries and cracks open, it releases a flood of everyday history. Conservators describe this moment as a heartbreaking race against time. An artifact that has been stable begins to deteriorate within hours of exposure to air. The wood of a fishing spear can warp and splinter as it dries. A finely woven basket can crumble to dust. Teams now work in these newly exposed zones with the urgency of first responders, carefully stabilizing finds with gentle sprays of water or quickly moving them to climate-controlled environments. It is a salvage operation on a grand scale, saving the most fragile pieces of our past from the very phenomenon that revealed them. What we save tells a detailed story no palace wall ever could. A handful of carbonized seeds found in the hearth of a riverside hut reveals the diet of a community, showing the shift from wild grains to domesticated barley. The smooth, worn handle of a wooden, its shape perfectly fitted to a human grip, speaks of agricultural technology and the daily labor of feeding a city. A bundle of flax fibers, ready for spinning, connects to the domestic craft of making clothing. Even the dung of domesticated animals, preserved in dried pens, can be analyzed to understand herd health and grazing patterns. These are the data points of existence. Along the now receding shores of Lake Turkana in Kenya, this organic record is illuminating one of humanity's great transitions. As drought exposes ancient beach lines, archaeologists are finding the bones of domesticated cattle alongside the tools of early pastoralists. They find beads made of ostrich eggshell and fragments of pottery, evidence of social identity and trade networks that emerged as people began to manage animals and move with the seasons. This is not the story of kings, but of families and herds, of learning to thrive in a challenging landscape. The catalog of common life now emerging is astonishing. From the dried-up riverbeds of Central Asia come felt saddle blankets and intricate horse trappings from nomadic cultures. In Europe, the bottoms of drain moats yield wooden bowls, leather shoes, and even delicate children's toys. Imagine discovering a bone flute, its finger holes still precise, or a net woven from plant fibers, ready to be cast into a river that is no longer there. Each object is a direct tactile link to an individual. Who was the child whose foot fit that sandal? Was it lost in a moment of play by the water's edge? Who last sharpened the edge of that wooden sickle before the field was abandoned? These personal stories, however, are framed by a larger economic tapestry now visible. That exotic seashell found far inland, preserved in the mud of a dried-up trading post, traces a route of commerce. The standardized weights for measuring grain, carved from river stone,
hint at a system of taxation and distribution. The everyday and the epic are woven together, showing that the fate of a civilization was always tied to the rhythm of its most mundane tasks, to the harvest, the meal, and the mended net. When the river failed, it wasn't just an empire that felt the loss. It was the child who could no longer find a cool place to play, the lies on its side in a wheat field, a vessel marooned far from any water. Its hull still cradles a cargo of clay storage jars, each one sealed 2,000 years ago for a journey that never ended. This surreal image, repeated across the world's drying riverbeds, is giving us something extraordinary, a tangible map of ancient commerce. We are not just finding lost ships, we are finding the lost highways themselves and the entire economic world that moved upon them. In the ancient and medieval world, rivers were not just sources of water, they were the most efficient freight corridors ever devised, carrying more tonnage with less energy than any road until the coming of the railroad. Now their abandoned channels are revealing the physical infrastructure of a globalized past, the wharves, warehouses, and that powered empires. Economic historians point to a critical insight: trade routes did not simply follow rivers, they were shaped by them. The placement of a city, the location of a tax collection point, the very price of grain in a distant capital, all were calculated based on the predictable flow of a water highway. When that flow changed, the entire economic geography could unravel. The distribution of shipwrecks and cargo, now exposed by drought, provides the hard evidence. Take the fabled incense route of Arabia. For centuries, camel caravans carried frankincense and myrrh from southern Arabia to the Mediterranean. But satellite imagery and ground surveys of now dry wadi systems, those ancient river channels that cut through the desert, reveal a more complex story. They show networks of small dams and cisterns built along these seasonal watercourses, suggesting that during wetter periods, these wadis supported not just caravans, but local agriculture and even limited boat traffic, creating a more interconnected economy than we imagined. The drying climate turned these arteries to dust, forcing a complete and costly reorganization of trade onto the backs of camels alone. Specific finds are sketching this map in remarkable detail. In recent years, record low water levels in the Rhine River have exposed the skeletal remains of Roman barges. These were not warships, but flat-bottomed workhorses, designed to carry massive loads of grain, stone, and pottery up and down the empire's northern border. Finding them stranded far from the modern channel shows precisely where the busy Roman river lane once ran, and how much it has shifted. In Scandinavia, droughts have lowered lakes like in Sweden, revealing not one, but multiple Viking-age ship landing sites. These are not dramatic burials, but practical gravel beaches and simple wooden jetties, where traders would have pulled their shallow draft boats ashore to repair them, trade goods, or wait out a storm. Each site is a pin on a map of Baltic commerce, showing how these communities were nodes in a watery network. Perhaps the most evocative example comes from the shrinking shores of Lake. As water retreated, archaeologists found a collection of perfectly preserved wooden staves, the exact type used to build the iconic flexible hulls of Viking ships. Nearby, they uncovered piles of iron ore and the remains of forging hearths. This was not just a landing, it was a riverside shipyard and manufacturing center, a bustling industrial zone where raw materials were turned into trade goods and the vessels that would carry them. It paints a vivid picture of a dynamic, water-based economy where the lake was not a barrier, but a liquid marketplace and a production hub. This leads to a reflective question with deep resonance today. These discoveries show that trade networks, however robust, were ultimately tethered to the environment that sustained them. When a river shifted its course or a lake level fell permanently, what happened to the merchant whose warehouse was now stranded, to the farmers who supplied the grain for the barges, to the city that taxed every jar of wine that passed its docks? The economic shock would ripple outward, destabilizing regions far from the drought's epicenter. The scale of commerce was always built upon the agricultural foundations of society, and both depended on the same vulnerable resource, reliable water. The sunken in the field is therefore a powerful symbol of interrupted connection. It represents a journey halted, a market left waiting, and an economic thread snipped by a changing climate. It asks us to consider the fragility of the networks that bind our own world, and what we might learn from the silent highways now emerging from the dust. A river is a living archive, writing its own autobiography in layers of silt and sand. As drought pulls back the water, it opens these pages for us to read, revealing a story not of kings or battles, but of rain and sun written over. This is the science of paleoclimatology, the study of past climates, and its most compelling records are now lying exposed in the world's drying riverbeds. Think of a river not just as water, but as a continuous tape recorder. Every flood, every season of low flow, every storm in its headwaters leaves a distinct signature in the mud it deposits. A powerful spring flood might carry coarse gravel and sand, leaving a thick, rough layer. A quiet decade might deposit only fine, dark silt full of organic matter. Over centuries, these layers stack up, creating a natural ledger of the climate's history. To decode this ledger, scientists look for specific clues called proxies. These are physical, chemical, or biological markers preserved in the sediment that stand in for direct weather measurements. In a newly exposed riverbank, a paleoclimatologist might examine the size of the sediment grains to gauge the river's past energy. They analyze the mineral composition, as certain minerals only wash down from the mountains during intense rains. They even study the fossilized shells of tiny microorganisms, whose chemistry changes with the temperature and salinity of the water they lived in. One of the most precise proxies comes from lake beds that were once connected to river systems. In calm, deep waters, sediment settles in neat, annual pairs, a light layer of silt deposited in spring and summer, and a dark, fine layer in winter. These are called varves, and like tree rings, they can be counted to create a precise yearly timeline stretching back thousands of years. Within these varves, other stories are trapped. Microscopic particles of charcoal speak of ancient wildfires, often more frequent during dry, hot periods. The ratio of different oxygen isotopes in carbonate deposits acts as an ancient thermometer and rain gauge, revealing shifts in temperature and precipitation. The process is meticulous. Teams extract long, tubular cores from the dried-up floodplains or lake margins. In the lab, they scan these cores with X-rays, analyze their chemistry, and painstakingly count the layers. This raw data is then fed into climate models, helping to distinguish a true, decades-long from normal seasonal variability. A clear example comes from the margins of the Nile. For centuries, the pharaoh's wealth depended on the river's annual flood. By coring sediments in now-dry desert basins that only filled during exceptionally high floods, researchers have reconstructed a year-by-year history of Nile flood levels going back over 5,000 years. The correlation is striking. Periods of consistently weak floods, as recorded in the thin, poor sediment layers, align perfectly with eras of famine, social unrest, and the collapse of central authority in ancient Egypt. Such as the fall of the Old Kingdom, the river's mud held a record of political destiny. This leads to a humbling reflection.
Our modern, instrument-based climate records are incredibly detailed, but they span only a century or two. The natural archives now being exposed by Drought offer a perspective that is orders of magnitude longer. They show us that the climate has always changed, with periods of severe aridity and great plenty. But this historical data also provides the essential context for our current moment, allowing us to see how the speed and scale of modern changes fit into the planet's long story. It raises a profound question. Are we reading a new chapter in an old cycle, or writing an entirely different book? A forest of stone rises from the mud, but these are not carved pillars. They are the skeletal remains of trees, their trunks bleached white and standing in silent rows where deep water once flowed. These are ghost forests, and their sudden appearance is one of the most haunting ecological revelations of modern drought. When reservoirs and lakes drain to historic lows, they unveil more than lost cities. They strip back the water to expose entire landscapes that have been submerged for a century or more, offering a rare window into the world as it was before the flood. This is a glimpse into deep ecological memory. Paleoecologists, scientists who study past environments, approach these sites with a sense of urgent discovery. In the cracked mud around the base of a standing stump, they carefully collect samples of ancient soil. Within that soil, they find a hidden library of ecological data, pollen grains and plant, tiny seeds and leaves preserved by the same water that buried them. By identifying these remains, they can reconstruct the precise mix of plants that grew in this valley before the dam was built. Was it a dense pine forest, a wetland meadow rich with sedges and reeds, a dry oak savanna? The pollen tells the story. This work establishes a baseline, a picture of the natural environment before modern human alteration. It reveals what the land itself was capable of supporting. For instance, in the vast bathtub ring now exposed around Lake Mead in the United States, the stumps of ancient juniper and ponderosa pine emerge. Their presence, along with pollen evidence, shows that the area now considered a desert was once a cooler, wetter woodland ecosystem. This is not just about the past. It is a critical reference point for ecological restoration today, showing what native plant communities might thrive if conditions change again. In Europe, drained lakebeds and reservoirs often reveal not forests, but the dark, fibrous layers of prehistoric peat bogs. These waterlogged deposits are time capsules. By examining the perfectly preserved leaves, insects, and even tree roots within the peat, scientists can trace how a lake slowly filled in with vegetation over thousands of years, transitioning from open water to marsh, and finally to forest. This natural process provides a model for how aquatic ecosystems evolve, but these peat layers also record human impact. A sudden spike in charcoal particles might indicate early farmers using slash and burn techniques to clear land. A change in pollen from diverse native trees to a dominance of cereal grains like wheat or barley marks the unmistakable signature of agriculture taking hold. The land itself keeps a diary of our relationship with it. For a perspective on a truly grand scale, we can look to places like the Bighorn Basin in Wyoming. Here, severe drought along shrinking river systems has exposed not just centuries-old stumps, but fossilized forests from tens of millions of years ago. Erosion cuts into hillsides, revealing layer upon layer of petrified tree trunks and leaf impressions. Paleoecologists study these layers to understand how entire ecosystems shifted over geological time in response to long-term climate change, showing how plant and animal communities reassembled after periods of warming or cooling. The reflective question this raises is profound. The ghost forests in our reservoirs today are the submerged landscapes of our very recent past. What will future droughts reveal about the world we are submerging now? What ecological snapshot are we creating for scientists a century from now? The drowned towns and farmlands we flood today for reservoirs will one day tell a story about early 21st century vegetation, agriculture, and land use. Our choices are becoming part of this layered geological record. This ecological perspective completes a circle, intertwining tightly with the human story of adaptation. It shows that every lost river valley civilization was built within a specific ecological context, a partnership between human ingenuity and the raw material of the living world. When the climate shifted and the water vanished, it was not just a human society that transformed, but an entire web of life. The ghost forest stands as a silent witness to that partnership, and to its end, reminding us that our history is forever rooted in the soil from which these pale trees grow. From hundreds of miles above the earth, a dry river delta in Central Asia reveals a secret written in the land. Faint, concentric circles and geometric lines etch the pale earth, patterns invisible to anyone standing on the ground, but unmistakable from the void of space. These are the ghostly fingerprints of ancient farms and buried canals, and they are only coming into clear view now because the world is drying. This is the powerful synergy of our era, where climate stress is unlocking the potential of a revolutionary tool, satellite archaeology. When soil is parched and vegetation sparse, the ground becomes more transparent to the eyes in orbit. Subtle variations in soil moisture and plant health, imperceptible to us, betray the presence of what lies beneath: a buried wall, a filled-in ditch, the compacted earth of an old road. Pioneers in this field, like Dr. Sarah, often describe it as turning on a light in a dark room. The droughts create the conditions, and the satellites provide the illumination. The science behind this illumination is called multispectral analysis. Satellites do not just take pictures in visible light, they capture data across many bands of the electromagnetic spectrum, including infrared and thermal. Buried stone or compacted earth retains moisture differently than the surrounding soil. This causes plants growing directly above these features to be slightly less healthy or to grow at a different rate. To our eyes, it looks like a uniform field. But to a satellite sensor measuring near-infrared reflectance, those subtle differences in plant stress or chlorophyll content form a perfect outline of a long-vanished structure. Different satellites serve as specialized tools in this orbital toolkit. NASA's long-running Landsat program provides free, decades worth of data, allowing scientists to observe landscape changes over time. Commercial satellites like those from Digital Globe offer incredibly high-resolution imagery, sharp enough to spot individual bricks or pottery shards in ideal conditions. The European Space Agency's Sentinel missions constantly monitor soil moisture and vegetation health, providing the perfect data layers to overlay with historical maps. A stunning example of this convergence is happening in the basin of Mongolia. As this vast inland sea shrinks, exposing kilometers of new shoreline, researchers have combed satellite imagery of the dry lakebed. They have identified hundreds of potential archaeological sites, from stone burial mounds to the circular outlines of ancient nomadic dwellings. These features, now clear from space, guide ground teams directly to places of interest, turning a needle in a haystack search into a targeted excavation. This bird's-eye view is transforming the scale of discovery. We are no longer just finding single sites. We are mapping entire cultural landscapes, seeing how settlements connected to each other, how trade routes snaked between rivers, and how agricultural systems fed populations.
Yet this powerful perspective also raises important reflective questions. Who has access to this expensive data? How do we ensure that the mapping of vulnerable sites does not inadvertently guide looters to them? And what is our responsibility when we can see, with crystal clarity from space, the vast footprint of a lost civilization, while also watching the modern climate forces that threaten to erase even more? The view from orbit offers both breathtaking discovery and profound perspective, framing our search for the past within the urgent context of our planet's present. The shoreline of the Dead Sea is not just receding, it is fleeing inland, leaving behind a stark, glittering plain of salt and mud. In this otherworldly landscape, one of the most dramatic archaeological case studies of our time is unfolding, a direct and startling consequence of human water management meeting a changing climate. The Dead Sea, the lowest point on Earth, is shrinking at an alarming rate, over a meter per year. Primarily because the waters of the Jordan River that feed it are now almost entirely diverted for agriculture and drinking water upstream. This environmental crisis is, however, peeling back the lake's historic shores, exposing caves, ancient harbors, and settlements that have been submerged or inaccessible for. For archaeologists, it is a bittersweet and urgent race against time in a region saturated with cultural and religious history. The most famous archaeological site here is Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the mid-20th century. Those texts were found in caves high in the cliffs, protected by the arid climate. Now, the rapid drop in the water level is exposing entirely new areas along the ancient shoreline, areas that were once bustling with activity. Teams are surveying these newly exposed terraces and lower caves, places that were likely used for salt mining, small-scale fishing, and as access points for trade. The unique chemistry of the Dead Sea, with its extreme salinity, acts as a remarkable preservative. Experts working in the region note that organic materials like leather, wood, and textiles, which would normally decay in centuries, could be perfectly preserved in these salt-encrusted zones. The hope and the scholarly urgency is to find additional scroll fragments or other documentary evidence from the biblical, Roman, and Byzantine periods before looters or the elements claim them. These surveys have already yielded profound discoveries beyond scrolls. As the water pulls back, the outlines of ancient harbors and jetty structures have emerged from the mud, showing how communities 2,000 years ago managed to operate on this harsh, salty sea. Evidence of sophisticated salt mining operations has been found, with channels and evaporation ponds designed to harvest the precious mineral. Each find sketches a more complete picture of daily life and industry in this challenging environment. It rewrites our understanding from a place of isolated religious retreat to one of integrated, if difficult, economic activity. The reflective question this raises is deeply resonant. This is not a slow, natural climatic shift revealing history. This is a rapid, human-caused change doing the uncovering. Our modern need for is literally draining a biblical sea, and in doing so, it is handing us fragments of the very past that shaped Western spiritual traditions. What does it mean to recover sacred history through an act of ecological alteration? The process feels fraught with irony. Every newly accessible cave could hold a fragment of a psalm or a gospel, a direct link to the spiritual foundations of millions. Yet its availability is a symptom of a strained and unsustainable relationship with water in the present. The archaeologists working here speak of a dual responsibility to meticulously recover and preserve these fragile pieces of heritage, while also understanding that their field season is made possible by an environmental indicator that is deeply troubling.
The story of the Dead Sea is a powerful microcosm of the global theme, where the search for our deepest roots becomes intertwined with the consequences of our modern survival. It shows that the line between discovery and loss is now razor thin, and that the pages of history we so desperately want to read are being delivered to us by a planet under profound stress. The Po River is Italy's lifeblood, a wide, silty ribbon flowing from the Alps to the Adriatic Sea. But in the summer of 2022, that ribbon frayed to a thread. Record heat and a profound lack of snowmelt reduced the nation's longest river to a startling new state, a vast, cracked plain of exposed sediment. And within that dry bed, the past began to whisper, then shout. The receding waters did not reveal a single era, but a spectacular stratification of time, a vertical timeline of human history laid bare in the mud. From a single vantage point, you could see the stone foundations of a medieval watchtower, the rusted hull of a World War II tank, and farther downstream, the massive oak timbers of a Roman cargo ship. This was not a single archaeological site. It was an entire river confessing its long memory. Italian archaeologists found themselves in a race against the returning rains, tasked with documenting an unprecedented scatter of finds across hundreds of kilometers. The logistical challenge was immense. Teams coordinated with local authorities and volunteers, using drones to map vast stretches of the riverbed and prioritizing the most fragile organic materials that would decay rapidly in the open air. The river was surrendering its secrets all at once, from prehistoric canoes carved from single tree trunks to ceramic shards from Renaissance pottery workshops. Each object, from a rusted 20th century rifle to a 2,000-year-old coin, was a pin on a map of continuous human habitation, proving this valley has been a corridor of life, conflict, and commerce since the earliest times. Among the most significant finds was the ghostly outline of a Roman cargo vessel, a navis, used to transport goods like wine, oil, and grain along the river and its network of canals. Its preserved timbers, dark and waterlogged, provided a master class in ancient shipbuilding techniques. Nearby, the low stone walls of Roman irrigation diversions emerged, showing how systematically the empire managed this fertile plain, the breadbasket of ancient Italy. Perhaps more telling were the traces of entirely different river channels, now just sinuous depressions in the dry earth. These channels prove the Po has writhed across its floodplain like a restless serpent over the centuries. A Roman settlement found stranded far from the modern riverbank tells a clear story. The community was built for a watercourse that later abandoned it. A shift that would have upended local economies and forced difficult relocations. The catalog of artifacts highlighted a remarkable state of preservation. The anaerobic, oxygen-poor environment of the river mud had acted as a perfect seal. Wooden posts from Neolithic settlements still showed the sharp marks of bronze tools. Leather fragments from a medieval shoe retained their stitching. Even organic materials like seeds and nuts were found intact, offering a direct snapshot of ancient diets. This preservation allowed for incredibly precise dating and analysis, turning each object into a reliable data point in the story of the valley. One discovery captured the world's attention for its stark, more recent history. Near the village of the Drought fully exposed the rusted skeleton of a 45-meter-long German landing barge, the scuttled in 1944. For decades, only its tip breached the surface, a local curiosity. In 2022, it sat completely beached on the cracked mud, a haunting, monstrous relic of the last century's conflict. Its sudden prominence drew tourists and photographers, a surreal spectacle of war machinery stranded in a peaceful river valley,
a visceral reminder that history's layers include chapters of profound hardship. This leads to a reflective question about our own place in this long story. For centuries, human management of the Po has been an attempt to stabilize the unstoppable, to build levees, dig canals, and drain wetlands for farmland. Each act of control buried the past a little deeper, sealing artifacts under layers of silt behind concrete walls. Now, the extreme drought, exacerbated by a warming climate, has temporarily undone that work, performing an accidental and overwhelming archaeological dig. The river's exposed bed shows us that our efforts at control are just the latest paragraph in a very long book. It asks us to consider what future droughts might reveal about our own era, about the foundations of our dams and the remnants of our industries. The Po's story broadens our geographical view beyond deserts and reservoirs, showing that even in the heart of densely populated Europe, climate stress is opening unexpected windows into the deep past, presenting us with a tangible, layered legacy of resilience and change written not in stone, but in the very sediment of a drying river. A freshly exposed riverbank reveals not just pottery shards, but a grid of crude holes, dug in haste and left open to the elements. This pockmarked earth is a crime scene, one becoming tragically common as waters recede. While scientists see a fleeting window for study, others see a sudden opportunity for profit, creating a stark conflict between discovery and destruction in these vulnerable landscapes. Heritage protection experts at organizations like UNESCO monitor this escalating challenge, noting that the very conditions that reveal these sites also make them prime targets. They are often in remote areas, far from regular patrols. Their artifacts, preserved for centuries in wet clay, are now lying exposed and can be easily lifted. And their sudden appearance sparks a rush, a race between those who seek to understand and those who seek to possess. The consequences of this looting are catastrophic and permanent. When an artifact is ripped from the ground, it loses its story. That simple clay pot held value not just as an object, but for where it was found, what soil layer it sat in, and what other items lay beside it. This context is the true treasure, allowing archaeologists to date a settlement, understand trade connections, or reconstruct dietary habits. Removing an item destroys that narrative forever, turning a potential chapter of human history into a lonely, silent trinket. The stratigraphy, the layered history of the site, is scrambled like pages torn from a book and scattered. A clear and painful example of this plays out along the shrinking reservoirs and riverbanks of the American Southwest. As water levels in the Colorado River system drop, they expose ancestral sites, places of deep cultural significance to modern Native American tribes. These locations, containing ceremonial objects, tools, and sometimes resting places, are sacred. Looters searching for valuable pottery or turquoise beads dig into these spaces, causing profound cultural harm and erasing physical evidence of a rich heritage. The artifacts that enter the black market are stripped of their origin, becoming mere commodities. This illicit trade fuels further destruction, creating a demand that encourages more people to scour drying shorelines with shovels. So where does this leave the responsible observer, someone captivated by these emerging stories? The tension is real between the wonder of seeing history uncovered and the imperative to protect it. Heritage organizations urge a simple principle: look, photograph, but do not touch or remove. Reporting a find to local authorities or a university archaeology department can ensure it is properly documented. The reflective question is one of stewardship. These sites are a shared inheritance, revealing themselves through a global environmental shift. Does our curiosity grant us a right to interact, or does it come with a responsibility to safeguard? The threat of looting underscores a painful irony. The same climate stress that grants us these revelations also places them in immediate peril, demanding new, urgent strategies for preservation before the past. So recently found is lost again to carelessness and greed. A farmer in Utah, walking the newly exposed crust of the Great Salt Lake, pauses not at a fence line, but at a line of stones. With a smartphone, they take a series of photographs, pin the location, and submit a report through a simple app. This act, repeated by hikers, boaters, and landowners around the world, represents a quiet revolution in how we respond to history's sudden appearance. In the face of rapid exposure and scarce professional resources, a new collaborative guardian is emerging: the engaged public. This is citizen science for heritage, a framework turning local knowledge and curiosity into a powerful tool for preservation. The model is straightforward but profound. Archaeological organizations, often stretched thin, develop training workshops and clear, standardized reporting protocols. They teach community members what to look for, how to distinguish a natural stone from a worked tool, and most importantly, what not to touch. They provide simple digital tools, like smartphone apps with menus for artifact type and condition, and fields for GPS coordinates and photographs. This data feeds directly into regional archaeological databases, creating a real-time map of emerging sites. The Scottish Coastal Archaeology and the Problem of Erosion project, known as SCAPE, offers a brilliant blueprint. Facing the relentless erosion of Scotland's coastlines, which is revealing and then destroying sites at an alarming rate, SCAPE trained local volunteers to systematically survey their own shorelines. These volunteers, armed with cameras and recording sheets, have documented thousands of vulnerable sites, from ancient middens to Viking boat burials, creating a permanent record of heritage that might otherwise vanish without a trace. The benefits of this approach are multifaceted. First, it creates an exponential increase in monitoring coverage. A handful of archaeologists cannot patrol every shrinking reservoir or drying river mile, but a community of informed observers can. Second, and perhaps more enduring, it fosters a powerful sense of local stewardship. When people participate in documenting a petroglyph panel on land they frequent, or a pioneer-era foundation on a family farm, they develop a personal connection to that history. They become its first line of defense, more likely to report suspicious activity or advocate for its protection. Finally, the educational value is immense, demystifying archaeology and building public appreciation for the fragile, non-renewable nature of cultural heritage. We can see this potential unfolding in real time around the Great Salt Lake. As its waters retreat to historic lows, they expose not just lakebed, but ancient shorelines inhabited for thousands of years. Previously submerged archaeological sites, including lithic scatters and potential campsites, are now lying in the open air. Local tribes, researchers, and heritage groups are working to train a network of respectful observers, people who walk the lakebed for recreation or research, to identify and report these fragile exposures without disturbing them. This collaborative vigilance is crucial, as these organic materials, once waterlogged, can crumble quickly in the dry air. So how can each of us become a responsible custodian of history that appears so suddenly? The answer lies in shifting from a mindset of discovery to one of documentation. It means understanding that the greatest contribution is often not taking an object, but capturing its image and context for experts to interpret. This collaborative model is more than just a practical workaround. It is part of a necessary adaptive response. recognizing that protecting our collective past in a changing climate is a task too vast for any single institution. It asks us to see ourselves not as passive viewers of these revelations, but as active participants in a global, communal effort to bear witness. The latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change presents a stark and unifying statistic. Droughts are now more frequent, more intense, and longer lasting in precisely the river basins we have been discussing. This is the powerful, troubling synthesis of our story. The same force that is revealing these lost river valleys is the very one that threatens our own human-driven climate change. It creates a profound and ironic parallel. Our modern actions are intensifying the droughts that expose ancient societies, many of whom themselves faced transformation or reorganization under the stress of natural climate shifts. The difference, scientists emphasize, is one of speed and source. Paleoclimatologist Dr. Bradley notes that while past civilizations contended with natural variability, the current warming trend is unequivocally driven by human activity, accelerating changes that once unfolded over centuries into the span of a single lifetime. This acceleration is the engine behind the receding waters. We can trace the connections with new precision. The severe droughts in the American Southwest, which have exposed ancestral canals and cliff dwellings, are linked to warmer temperatures in the Pacific Ocean that alter the jet stream, reducing snowpack in the Rocky Mountains that feeds the Colorado River. In South Asia, shifts in monsoon patterns, intensified by global warming, are causing more erratic rainfall, parching the landscapes that hold the ghost of the. Across the Mediterranean, a pronounced trend toward, a hallmark of anthropogenic climate change, is lowering reservoirs and rivers from Spain to Iraq, bringing history to the surface. This global pattern forces a difficult moral reckoning. We are granted a fleeting, unplanned museum of human adaptation, a library of strategies for surviving scarcity, but the admission ticket is a planetary emergency of our own making. The past is speaking, not from a place of serene archaeological curiosity, but from the front lines of our current crisis. Are we listening to the lessons these dry riverbeds offer, or are we, in our continued reliance on vast, rigid systems and intensive water use, simply creating the future archaeology for our own descendants? The uncovered civilizations show us that resilience lies in flexibility, in decentralized systems, and in a deep respect for local water limits. Our modern global society, for all its technology, is testing those limits on a scale they never imagined. The connection is now complete, from the dust of a Mesopotamian canal to the cracked mud of a 21st century reservoir. The story written in the earth is no longer just about them, it is increasingly about us. Concrete walls now hold back rivers where ancient canals once guided them. This is the defining contrast of our age, a choice between two philosophies of water. On one side, the monumental dam, a symbol of 20th century confidence, harnessing immense power and storing water for millions. On the other, the quiet intelligence of a canal, a gently sloping tunnel that taps an aquifer and delivers water by gravity alone, without a single watt of electricity. Placing these images side by side is not about declaring one right and the other wrong, but about evaluating resilience. It asks which system is built for the long conversation with a changing planet. Water resource engineers often speak of the hard path versus the soft path. The hard path relies on large-scale centralized infrastructure, like mega dams, long-distance aqueducts, and massive desalination plants. These projects deliver enormous benefits, generating clean power and providing water security to growing cities and vast farmlands.
The soft path, in contrast, focuses on decentralized management, efficiency, conservation, and working with natural systems. It includes restoring wetlands, reviving ancient harvesting techniques, and designing cities to capture rainwater. The ancient world, out of necessity, mastered the soft path. Our modern world has overwhelmingly chosen the hard path. The question is whether we can, or must, learn to walk both. The consequences of this choice are written across the very landscapes where history is emerging. Consider the modern dams on the Tigris and Euphrates, like Turkey's massive dam. Its reservoir is designed to provide water and electricity, but in filling, it submerged the ancient town of, a site with 12,000 years of continuous human habitation. It is a trade-off made in concrete, sacrificing a deep archive of the past for the perceived needs of the present. But the echoes of antiquity do not stop there. These modern reservoirs face the same relentless challenge that plagued Mesopotamian canals ago: siltation. Rivers carry sediment, and when they are, that sediment settles in the reservoir, slowly reducing its capacity. Just as ancient societies had to mobilize armies of laborers to dredge their canals, modern engineers must plan for the eventual, costly loss of storage, a vulnerability built into the design from day one. This vulnerability extends to the very concept of control. A megadam creates a single point of potential failure, a bottleneck of dependency. In a prolonged drought, the reservoir behind it can drop to catastrophic levels, leaving entire regions without their primary water source all at once. Ancient systems often exhibited a more distributed resilience. A community might rely on a network of smaller cisterns, rooftop collection, and local springs. If one source failed, others could compensate. The system was more adaptable, less brittle. Nowhere is the contrast more acute than beneath our feet, in the world of groundwater. Ancient societies from Persia to the American Southwest built qanats and dug stepwells to access this hidden resource, but their technology limited how much they could draw. Their systems were, in a sense, self-regulating. The flow from a qanat is determined by the water table, preventing over-extraction. Modern technology shattered that limit. High-capacity electric pumps allow us to mine groundwater at a staggering pace, draining aquifers that took thousands of years to fill. We are creating new lost rivers, not on the surface, but deep underground, with consequences for future generations that are only beginning to be understood. Yet a hopeful synthesis is emerging in some places, a conscious look backward to move forward. In the arid state of Rajasthan, India, cities like Delhi and Jaipur are facing dire water shortages. In response, communities and NGOs are not just drilling deeper, they are reviving ancient stepwells. These magnificent structures are being cleaned, restored, and reconnected to local aquifers. They are not merely tourist attractions. They are becoming functional parts of the water supply, providing a decentralized, community-managed source that is less energy-intensive than pumping from great depths. The stepwell's design is itself a lesson. Its deep, shaded interior minimizes evaporation, a natural advantage in a hot climate. Anthropologists who study these hybrid approaches note a crucial shift in thinking. It is not about abandoning modern engineering, but about integrating it with proven, place-based wisdom. It is about using satellite data to identify ideal locations for new check dams, inspired by those of the ancestral, to recharge groundwater. It is about designing new neighborhoods with permeable surfaces and cisterns, principles of Petra used to thrive in the desert. So have we sacrificed long-term resilience for short-term control? The evidence from the drying riverbeds suggests that the societies that clung rigidly to their grand hydraulic systems, even as the climate shifted,
often faced the most difficult reorganizations. The ones that displayed flexibility, that could migrate or diversify their water sources, endured. Our modern global civilization is the ultimate grand system, interconnected and complex. The evaluation offered by the past is clear. Our greatest infrastructure projects must be paired with a humility that learns from the Qanat and the stepwell, from the check dam and the rooftop cistern. It points toward a future where water management is not a binary choice between old and new, but a mosaic, blending our most powerful tools with some of humanity's oldest. Most elegant wisdom for living within our means on a changing earth. The cracked mud holds more than artifacts, it holds memories. For the global audience, a receding reservoir is a fascinating news story, but for the people who live on its shores, it is the return of a ghost, a landscape of profound personal history suddenly laid bare. This is the human heart of the phenomenon, where geological exposure meets emotional reckoning. An elderly farmer in Galicia, Spain, walks across land unseen for 60 years and points to a familiar cluster of stones, the foundation of the house where his grandfather was born. Submerged when the valley was flooded to create a reservoir for a distant city. His story is not one of discovery, but of recognition, a visceral reconnection with a place that existed only in family lore and faded photographs. Across the world, as waters retreat, they are uncovering not just lost civilizations, but the very recent past of displaced communities, triggering a complex wave of collective memory, grief, and in some cases, a renewed claim to identity. Psychologists and oral historians have a term for a specific kind of distress linked to environmental change. It describes the emotional pain experienced when your home environment is transformed around you, leaving you feeling a profound sense of loss while still physically in place. For communities watching their history resurface, the feeling is uniquely layered. There is the original grief of displacement when the dam was built, a loss often buried by time and necessity. Then decades later, the drought pulls back the water and that loss is physically exhumed, making it fresh and tangible again. The past is no longer abstract, it is right there, cracked and baking in the sun. This can evoke powerful, conflicting emotions. There is sacred awe at seeing an ancestral burial ground or ceremonial site re-emerge, a chance for descendant communities to perform ceremonies and reconnect with cultural roots that were literally cut off. For Native American tribes along the shrinking Missouri River, the exposure of old village sites and riverine ecosystems is a bittersweet opportunity. It allows elders to show younger generations where their people lived and fished for centuries, reinforcing a cultural identity tied intimately to the river, even as they advocate for its protection in the present. Yet alongside reverence, there can also be a surge of political awakening and a demand for justice. In villages from Spain to Turkey to Brazil, the reappearance of church steeples, cemeteries, and town squares in drained reservoirs has reignited conversations about the costs of progress. Older residents share stories of forced relocation, of promises broken by governments and corporations. The physical evidence becomes a rallying point, a monument to what was sacrificed for modern water and energy needs. It fuels activism, not just about the past, but about current water management and the rights of communities in the face of climate-induced scarcity. The past, in these moments, becomes a powerful tool for advocating a more equitable and sustainable future. The emotional spectrum is wide. In the Andes of Chile and Peru, communities are witnessing another kind of unveiling as glaciers retreat and lakes shrink. They are finding perfectly preserved prehistoric fossils and archaeological sites, yes, but they are also losing the permanent ice fields
that have long been part of their spiritual and physical landscape. The feeling is one of simultaneous discovery and erosion, gaining knowledge of the ancient past while losing a fundamental element of their contemporary world. It is a poignant reminder that these revelations are not gifts, but symptoms. For the global public watching online, these images stir a different, more diffuse form of. They see the ghostly outline of a city in the desert or a village in a reservoir, and it triggers a subconscious anxiety about our own future. It becomes a metaphor, a preview of what might be left behind if our own relationship with water remains unbalanced. This deep emotional resonance places a profound responsibility on how these stories are told. Ethical storytelling in this context means centering the voices of the communities most affected. It means moving beyond the simplistic headline of an amazing discovery to explore the layered human experience beneath it. It asks us to listen to the farmer's story, to understand the tribal elder's perspective, and to recognize that the most important artifact being uncovered might not be a pot or a tool, but a feeling, a memory, or a long-suppressed truth. When we look at these images of resurfaced history, we are ultimately looking in a mirror, reflecting our own attachments, our own losses, and our own deep, enduring need to belong to a place. This human connection, so vividly exposed by the drought, compels us to ask not just what we are finding, but what we are learning about our collective heart, and how that knowledge might guide our hands as we shape the world to come. A drone hovers silently over a grid of ancient stones, its laser scanner painting the site with invisible light. This is not just observation, it is digital salvation. For the archaeologists standing by, the clock is their greatest adversary, knowing the reservoir will soon refill and erase this window into the past. Their mission is to capture everything, to create a perfect virtual copy before the physical world reclaims it. This race against the weather has given rise to a new frontier in heritage preservation, the creation of permanent digital twins. Digital archaeologists like Dr. Heather Richards explain that this process begins with a symphony of coordinated technology. A drone equipped with LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, flies a precise grid pattern over the site. It emits millions of laser pulses per second, each one measuring the distance to the ground. When combined with ultra-high-resolution photographs taken simultaneously, these data points coalesce into a breathtakingly detailed three-dimensional point cloud, a digital replica where every stone, every potsherd, and every crack in the mud is recorded to within a few millimeters of accuracy. On the ground, teams supplement this aerial view with terrestrial laser scanners. These tripod-mounted units capture intricate details from street level, recording the texture of a carved inscription or the precise angle of a collapsed wall that the drone's overview might miss. Every scan is with real-time kinematic GPS, or RTK, a system that provides centimeter-perfect positioning on the globe. This means the digital model is not just a pretty picture, it is a spatially accurate record that can be measured, analyzed, and compared with future discoveries anywhere in the world. The workflow then moves from capture to creation. Specialized software stitches the millions of LiDAR points and thousands of overlapping photographs together, building a three-dimensional model. This model can be explored on a computer screen, rotated, and zoomed into, allowing researchers to take measurements or examine relationships between structures without ever setting foot on the fragile. Temporary site. A powerful example of this rescue operation is found at the Dholavira Reservoir in northern Portugal. Every few years during severe droughts, the waters retreat to reveal the stone foundations of an entire 18th century village, complete with streets, homes, and a church.
Before its submersion in the 1970s, the village was home to hundreds. Now, a collaborative project between universities and heritage agencies conducts rapid digital documentation campaigns whenever the water drops. They have created a comprehensive archive of three-dimensional models, panoramic photographs, and even immersive virtual reality experiences that allow people, including descendants of the village, to walk its streets long after the rains return and the physical site vanishes again. This leads to a profound and necessary question. What is the true value of a digital twin compared to the tangible, physical site? A digital model cannot replicate the scent of the damp earth, the feel of the sun on stone, or the emotional weight of standing where history happened. Its strength lies in permanence and access. It preserves the site at a specific moment in time, freezes it against further decay or ray submergence, and makes it available to anyone with an internet connection. A student in Tokyo, a researcher in Ayers, and a descendant in Lisbon can all study the same digital village simultaneously, democratizing access to heritage in an unprecedented way. Yet this digital resurrection also sparks complex debates about ownership and ethics. Who owns this meticulously crafted digital copy of a community's past? Is it the institution that funded the scanning, the archaeologists who performed the work, or the cultural descendants for whom the site holds deep meaning? As these digital archives grow into vast online museums, establishing protocols for respectful data sharing, cultural sensitivity, and long-term digital curation becomes as critical as the fieldwork itself. This technological response is ultimately an act of hope. It acknowledges the transient nature of these drought-born revelations while refusing to let their knowledge be lost. It ensures that when the water rises, the story does not sink. In creating these immutable digital records, we are building a new kind of library for the future, one where the most fragile pages of our past are backed up in the cloud. Waiting to be read by generations we may never meet, the final layer of sand is carefully brushed over the protective, sealing a Roman mosaic from the sun and air once more. As the forecasted rains approach, this act of deliberate reburial is not surrender, but a strategic choice. It forces a profound and practical dilemma upon us, one that echoes across every drying riverbed and emptying reservoir. When the waters inevitably return, what is our duty to these fleeting windows into the past? Do we excavate everything we can, or do we protectively rebury what we have found, entrusting it once again to the mud that preserved it for? This question sits at the heartbreaking intersection of opportunity and limitation. Conservators who specialize in waterlogged artifacts often speak of a counterintuitive truth. For organic materials like wood, leather, and textiles, the dark, oxygen-poor environment of a waterlogged site is a perfect vault. The moment these items are exposed to air, their clock starts ticking rapidly. Excavation is not a rescue. It is the beginning of an endless and expensive conservation battle, requiring climate-controlled storage and constant monitoring. In many cases, the most responsible preservation strategy is, in fact, reburial. This is the argument for preservation in perpetuity, leaving the site intact for future generations who may have better technology, more funding, or a deeper understanding of how to care for what lies within. The decision is never made lightly. A complex matrix of factors must be weighed. First, the significance of the site. Does it hold unique information that could rewrite a chapter of history? Is it of irreplaceable cultural or spiritual importance to a living community? Second, the reality of resources. Full archaeological excavation is a monumental undertaking, requiring years of work, a small army of specialists, and millions in funding.
That funding is rarely available on the short timeline dictated by a drought. Third, the long-term prospects. If we excavate, do we have a viable plan for conserving, curating, and studying the artifacts in perpetuity? Or will they end up in cardboard boxes in a basement, deteriorating unseen? These questions lead to a spectrum of strategies, each a different compromise. Full excavation is the ideal but most rare path, reserved for sites of paramount importance where funding and time align. More common is selective sampling, where archaeologists carefully extract a representative sample of artifacts, and like seeds, pollen, and insect remains, to answer specific research questions before reburial. This creates a snapshot, a data set that can inform understanding of the larger site left in place. Then there is monitored reburial, a sophisticated middle ground. Before the water rises, teams document the site in exhaustive detail using three-dimensional scanning and photography. They may place inert markers or even sealed time capsules containing modern materials and project information near key features. Then they carefully recover the site with layers of protective and clean sand, creating a stable, documented environment. The goal is to both preserve the site and leave a clear map for anyone who might uncover it again in 50 or 100 years. A powerful example of this high-stakes debate is playing out in the Valley of Israel. There, prolonged drought has revealed the sprawling outlines of a massive Roman legionary base that once housed over 5,000 soldiers. It is a discovery of immense historical significance, a complete snapshot of imperial military power. Yet the site is vast, and the window of access is uncertain. The debate among archaeologists and heritage managers is intense. Some advocate for a rapid, large-scale excavation to recover as much as possible before the next rainy season. Others argue for meticulous documentation and protective reburial, preserving the largely intact base for a future, better-equipped generation to study in its full context. This is the stewardship challenge in its form. It asks us to balance our compelling desire for knowledge with a humble acknowledgement of our limits. Is it sometimes more ethical to let sleeping ruins lie, to acknowledge that our current touch might be more damaging than the passage of time? The act of reburial is an admission that we are not the end of history, but a link in a chain. We are temporary custodians, making the best choice we can with the tools and time we have, always hoping that the future will be wiser, and that the mud will keep its secrets safe a little while longer. History is not a book with finished pages, but a manuscript constantly being edited by the present. Every time a drought peels back another layer of earth, it sends a ripple through time, forcing historians to pick up their red pens and revise the stories we thought we knew. This is not just about adding new facts. It is about a fundamental shift in perspective, a move away from the dramatic, singular idea of collapse toward a more nuanced understanding of human resilience. Archaeologists and climate historians are leading a quiet revolution, one that sees past societies not as failed monuments, but as dynamic communities making difficult choices in the face of a changing world. Revisionist historians have championed this view. He notes that for decades, the dominant narrative was one of dramatic endings, of civilizations falling from greatness due to war, invasion, or mysterious catastrophe. But the physical evidence now emerging from dry riverbeds and lake cores tells a different, more complex story. It reveals a pattern not of sudden death, but of transformation, migration, and adaptation. The question is no longer why did they fail, but how did they respond? We can see this intellectual evolution clearly in the case of the Indus Valley civilization. The old textbook narrative often pointed to a hypothetical invasion by nomadic Aryans
as the cause of its end. The new story, built from drought-exposed river channels and sediment analysis, paints a far different picture. As the mighty river dwindled, the tightly integrated urban network became unsustainable. The civilization did not vanish in a blaze of conflict. It underwent a process of urbanization. People gradually moved eastward toward the more reliable Ganges River system, dispersing into smaller, more mobile agricultural communities. Their sophisticated urban culture transformed, its elements flowing into the cultural tapestry of the Indian subcontinent. This was not a collapse, but a strategic reorganization for survival. This revised lens is being applied to other famous historical puzzles. The classic Maya collapse is now understood not as a single, simultaneous event, but as a staggered series of regional transformations. While severe drought in the 9th century placed immense pressure on Maya city-states in the southern lowlands, it was not the sole cause. Research suggests that political instability, shifting trade routes, and environmental degradation from intensive agriculture all interacted with the dry periods. The response was not uniform. Some cities were abandoned, while others in the north, actually thrived for centuries longer. The people did not disappear, they migrated, adapted their practices, and their descendants are present today. Similarly, the story of the Norse in Greenland has been rewritten from one of stubborn failure to one of compounded challenge. For centuries, it was told that these medieval settlers simply refused to adapt to the Arctic environment, clinging to European ways until they died out. New climate data from ice cores and lake sediments reveals a more sympathetic and complex reality. The Norse arrived during a relatively warm period, establishing farms in sheltered fjords. When the climate cooled during the Little Ice Age, their growing season shortened, and sea ice disrupted trade with Europe. They faced this not with ignorance, but with a tragic convergence of hardships, including likely conflict with the incoming culture ancestors of the modern Inuit, and a reliance on a pastoral economy that became untenable. Their story is one of a society pushed beyond its adaptive capacity by multiple, simultaneous stresses. An illustrative example of this narrative shift comes from the high Andes. The state, which flourished around Lake, was long thought to have collapsed around 1000 AD due to a major drought. However, sediment cores taken from dried-up shorelines around the lake are refining that timeline. The data shows not one catastrophic drought, but a series of severe dry periods interspersed with recovery. This suggests decline was a prolonged process of weakening, where each drought eroded the state's ability to manage its raised field agricultural systems, gradually undermining its political and economic power. The people likely dispersed into smaller, resilient highland communities, their cultural legacy persisting in a new form. This ongoing intellectual evolution prompts a powerful, reflective question. If our understanding of the Indus Valley, the Maya, and the Greenland Norse can change so dramatically with new evidence, how fixed is any chapter of our history? What other long-held stories are waiting to be rewritten by the next drought, the next satellite survey, or the next core sample? The past is not a static exhibit behind glass. It is a living conversation between the earth and those who seek to understand it. Each cracked riverbed is a new sentence in that conversation, challenging our assumptions and reminding us that human history is, above all, a story of continual adaptation to an ever-changing planet. For an indigenous knowledge keeper, the stone emerging from the mud is not a discovery, but a homecoming. The scientific community often speaks of drought archaeology as a revelation, a window into a forgotten past. Yet for many indigenous peoples whose ancestors lived in these river valleys for thousands of years,
The receding waters are simply pulling back a curtain on a living memory. The petroglyph on a newly exposed boulder, the outline of a fishing weir in a dry stream. These are not puzzles to be solved, but pages from a family history that was never lost, only waiting. This moment represents a powerful and necessary intersection, where Western scientific methods are meeting indigenous knowledge systems, creating a richer, more respectful understanding of the past. This collaborative approach is guided by a principle called two-eyed seeing, a concept from Elder Albert Marshall. It describes learning to see with one eye through the lens of indigenous knowledge and with the other through the lens of Western science, using both together for the benefit of all. It is not about one validating the other, but about both offering unique and complementary strengths. Western science excels at precise measurement, dating, and material analysis. Indigenous knowledge, carried through oral histories, songs, and place names, offers deep contextual meaning, an understanding of ecological relationships, and a long-term, generational perspective on change. When a drought exposes an ancient campsite along a riverbank, an archaeologist might see a scatter of stone tools and charcoal, datable to a specific century. A tribal historian from that same river valley might hear the description and recall an elder's story about a great gathering place used during a time when the river ran low, a story passed down for 30 generations. Together, these perspectives do not conflict, they complete the picture. We see this respectful integration happening across the globe. In Australia, as severe droughts and alter landscapes, they expose ancient Aboriginal aquaculture systems, intricate networks of stone channels and ponds used to manage eel harvests. For scientists, these are marvels of early engineering. For Aboriginal communities, they are tangible proof of a sophisticated cultural practice detailed in dreaming stories, a physical manifestation of a responsibility to care for country that stretches back. In the Amazon, receding rivers have revealed vast geometric earthworks and pottery. While some researchers initially labeled these as evidence of lost cities, indigenous collaborators offer a different interpretation, one of managed forest gardens and ceremonial landscapes that shaped, but did not dominate, the environment. Their knowledge reframes the find from one of domination to one of symbiosis. A clear and collaborative example is unfolding in the American Southwest. As persistent drought lowers the river, it exposes countless ancestral and other Native American sites. State and federal agencies now routinely partner with tribes like the Pueblo of and the Del Sur Pueblo. Tribal members walk the newly exposed shorelines, not as consultants, but as co-stewards. They identify lithic scatters, hearths, and petroglyphs, often correlating them with oral histories about migration routes and old village locations. Their guidance is crucial for determining which sites are most culturally sensitive and how they should be protected or documented before the river rises again. This partnership moves archaeology from a model of extraction, where artifacts are removed for study elsewhere, to one of relationship, where knowledge is gathered with permission and care. And the focus shifts to in-place preservation and cultural continuity. An indigenous archaeologist might explain that their work is not just about what is found, but about how it is found and who it is for. The process itself must be respectful, often involving ceremony and protocol before any recording begins. This approach recognizes that these places are not abandoned. They remain part of a living cultural landscape, connected to the identity and spirituality of descendant communities. So what does it mean to truly listen to the land and to the people who have listened to it the longest? The droughts are forcing this question to the forefront. When a river reveals its secrets, the most profound interpretation
may not come from a lab report alone, but from a story told in a language that has named that river for centuries. This collaborative path does more than just enrich the data. It heals historical divides and builds a more holistic narrative of human resilience. It suggests that the deepest understanding of these lost river valleys may lie not in what we can take from them, but in what we are willing to learn from the wisdom that has never left their banks. A discovery in the mud can stop a billion-dollar dam in its tracks. This is the powerful, immediate reality when drought archaeology collides with modern governance. The sudden appearance of a lost city or sacred complex in a planned construction zone forces a stark choice between progress and preservation, a dilemma made infinitely more complex by the climate crisis itself. Policy analysts note that these resurfaced sites become instant flashpoints, transforming academic interest into urgent political and economic negotiation. The stakeholders in this high-stakes debate form a complex web. National governments weigh water and energy security against cultural legacy. International corporations face costly delays and redesigns. Local communities, often the most directly affected, grapple with potential economic benefits from tourism against the disruption of long-planned projects. And global bodies like UNESCO may step in, potentially designating a site as World Heritage in danger, which can influence international funding and apply diplomatic pressure. This is not a theoretical conflict, it is happening now. The case of Turkey's dam on the Tigris River offers a profound and contentious example. The dam's reservoir was designed to bring hydropower and irrigation to a region, but it also deliberately submerged the ancient town of, a site with a continuous 12,000-year human history. During periods of severe drought, when water levels drop, the scale of the submerged archaeological landscape becomes hauntingly visible, revealing the outlines of streets, bridges, and monuments. This occasional reappearance fuels ongoing debate about the permanent loss, serving as a stark reminder of the trade-offs made. For heritage lawyers, these situations create landmark legal challenges. They must navigate national laws on cultural property, international conventions, and often, the rights of indigenous or local communities whose connection to the land is both cultural and spiritual. A discovery can trigger environmental impact assessments, leading to court injunctions that pause construction for years. The legal argument often hinges on the concept of irreplaceable value. Asking whether a newly revealed site constitutes a unique and renewable cultural resource that outweighs the projected benefits of the development. Beyond halting projects, a major find can actively reshape regional economies through tourism. A village facing economic decline might suddenly find itself on the map as the gateway to a lost civilization. This brings investment in hotels, restaurants, and guide services. However, this windfall is a double-edged sword. An influx of visitors requires infrastructure to manage them responsibly, protecting the fragile site from unintentional damage. The economic boost must be balanced with sustainable management to prevent loving the site to death. In some instances, the discovery leads directly to the creation of new protected areas. A government responding to public and scholarly pressure might redraw the boundaries of a national park or establish a new archaeological reserve, legally shielding the landscape from future industrial or agricultural development. This act permanently alters local land use, prioritizing heritage and ecology over other forms of extraction. On an even larger stage, these resurfaced pasts can become pieces in international water disputes. In regions like the Nile Basin or the Mekong, where multiple nations share a river system, a drought-exposed site in one country
can be used to bolster historical claims to water rights or to criticize a neighbor's upstream dam projects. The ancient past becomes a rhetorical tool in modern hydrological diplomacy. So who ultimately holds the pen that writes the fate of these places? Is it the engineer, the archaeologist, the village elder, or the government minister? The answer is rarely clear, and the process is almost always a tense negotiation of competing values and urgent needs. These debates reveal that our relationship with history is never passive. It is an active, consequential negotiation that determines what we save, what we sacrifice, and what legacy we choose to build upon for the future. A digital map pulses with color, highlighting ribbons of red along the world's major river systems. These are not flood warnings, but archaeological vulnerability hotspots, a forecast of where history is most likely to emerge next. This is the new frontier of drought archaeology, moving from reaction to prediction. By merging the science of tomorrow's climate with the maps of yesterday's civilizations, researchers are beginning to anticipate discovery, preparing to protect our past before it is even exposed. The collaboration is as innovative as it is urgent, pairing climate modelers who simulate future aridity with archaeologists who hold the keys to ancient settlement patterns. Their methodology builds a powerful predictive engine. First, they feed in the latest climate projections from bodies like the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, focusing on regions forecast for the most severe declines in precipitation and snowpack over the coming decades. Next, they layer in hydrological data, modeling future reservoir levels and soil moisture deficits. The final, crucial layer is archaeological potential, drawn from vast existing databases of known sites, historical maps, and satellite surveys that show where human activity has historically clustered. Always near water, this synthesis creates a probability map, showing where shrinking water is most likely to intersect with the buried footprints of past societies. The tools are both global and granular. Broad climate models point to entire basins at risk, like the already stressed Colorado River system or the unpredictable monsoon-fed rivers of South Asia. Then, higher-resolution local data can zoom in, assessing the vulnerability of a specific reservoir shoreline or a stretch of riverbank known to have supported medieval trade. An illustrative and critical example is the work beginning in the Nile Delta. Here, the threat is not just drought, but a combination of forces. Reduced river flow from upstream dams and droughts allows from the Mediterranean to push farther inland, a process called salinization. At the same time, the delta itself is slowly sinking, a problem known as subsidence. Climate models predict these processes will accelerate. The predictive work suggests that as the water table changes and shorelines erode, they will not only expose ancient port cities and settlements buried in the silt, but may also rapidly destroy them through salt corrosion and erosion once they are exposed. This allows heritage managers a crucial head start to plan for emergency documentation or even physical barriers to protect sites that are still submerged. This forward-looking approach presents a profound and paradoxical question. Predictive modeling is born from the certainty of worsening climate conditions. It allows us to safeguard heritage, but it requires us to accept a future of more frequent and severe droughts. So where should our hope truly lie? Should we hope for the droughts that will reveal lost chapters of humanity? Or should we channel all our effort into mitigating the climate change that drives this revealing crisis? The predictive modelers and archaeologists working on this are acutely aware of the tension. Their goal is not to welcome drought, but to build resilience against its inevitable impacts. This proactive stance represents a fundamental shift in mindset. We are no longer waiting for the water to drop and then scrambling. We are beginning to read the climate models as a guide to our own history, using the forecast of a drier future to map the rediscovery of our past. It is a sobering, sophisticated form of preparedness, ensuring that when the earth cracks open once more, we are ready to listen, to learn, and to protect the fragile stories written in the mud. A teacher in Arizona projects two satellite images side by side. One shows the deep blue expanse of Lake Mead in the year 2000. The other, from last year, reveals a stark white bathtub ring and a skeletal shoreline. This is not just a lesson in climatology. It is a living portal into human history, and it is happening right now in classrooms around the world. The dramatic, tangible evidence of drought archaeology is becoming one of the most powerful educational tools of our time, transforming abstract textbook chapters into urgent, interdisciplinary conversations. Educators are seizing this moment to build curricula that connect the dots between climate science, river geography, ancient engineering, and modern ethics, all through the lens of a single, powerful image of a receding shoreline. The core of this approach is its interdisciplinarity. A single lesson can begin with the physics of evaporation and shifting jet streams, move to the geography of ancient river courses visible from space, analyze the social structure needed to build a massive reservoir like Angkor's West, and culminate in a debate on the ethics of modern water use. This is learning anchored in a current event, making the past viscerally relevant. Expert curriculum developers, like those with National Geographic Education, emphasize that these topics foster systems thinking. Students are not just memorizing dates, they are tracing cause and effect across centuries, seeing how an environmental shift could ripple through a society's food production, trade, and political stability. Concrete lesson plans bring this to life. In a middle school science class, students might analyze data from real sediment cores, identifying layers of coarse flood gravel versus fine, drought-related dust, and creating a timeline of wet and dry periods for a lost river. In a high school history or ethics seminar, the class could stage a mock town hall meeting. The scenario: a drought has exposed a sacred indigenous site on federal land. Students take on roles: the tribal historic preservation officer, a reservoir manager concerned about water security, an archaeologist, and a local farmer. They must negotiate a path forward, grappling with the real-world tensions between preservation, resource needs, and cultural respect. The resources to support this learning are expanding rapidly. Major museums are creating traveling exhibitions titled Water and Civilization or Climate and Culture, featuring LiDAR maps of Angkor and three-dimensional prints of artifacts from the dried-up Tigris. Documentary series dedicated to these discoveries, often available through educational streaming platforms, provide stunning visuals and expert interviews. Perhaps most impactful are the interactive websites and virtual field trips. Institutions like the University of Arkansas's Center for Advanced Spatial Technologies have developed online platforms where students can digitally explore three-dimensional models of drought-exposed sites. Rotating pottery or measuring the dimensions of a ghostly foundation, all from their classroom or home. An illustrative model is the Drought and Discovery Outreach Program run by the Museum of Northern Arizona. Designed for grades 4 through 12, it uses the Colorado River's crisis and the subsequent exposure of ancestral sites as its central case study. Students examine replica artifacts, like a mano and matate used for grinding corn, and discuss what these objects reveal about daily life. They then look at contemporary photographs of the same river, now drastically reduced,
and are guided through a discussion on water conservation, drawing direct lines between ancient practices and modern choices. The program succeeds because it makes stewardship personal, connecting the deep past to actionable present-day responsibility. This leads to a quiet, reflective question for any viewer. How do you engage with the history embedded in your own landscape? You might not live near a shrinking reservoir, but every community has its own environmental story, a river that was channelized, a wetland that was drained, a forest that changed. Education that starts with a dramatic satellite image can blossom into a deeper curiosity about local place. It encourages us to look at the land with new eyes, to ask what stories the soil beneath our feet might hold, and to understand that fostering a sense of stewardship often begins with a single, compelling story of connection, of a past that has suddenly and urgently returned to speak to us. The cracked earth of a forgotten river is more than a physical landscape, it is a mirror. The same process that pulls back water to reveal lost cities operates in our own lives and societies, a powerful metaphor for how crisis strips away the surface to expose what lies beneath. Just as a reservoir's decline uncovers a submerged village, periods of profound stress, whether personal or collective, can drain away our normalcy and force hidden truths into the light. This is the deeper meaning of these archaeological revelations. They offer a lens through which to understand our own age of uncovering. Cultural commentators note that we are living through an era of great exposure, where long-ignored social structures, historical narratives, and environmental realities are being laid bare by the drought of crisis. The metaphor invites us to ask, what are the rivers in our own world that have receded, and what have they revealed? On a personal level, many experience a kind of emotional or spiritual drought, a period where the comforting routines of life dry up. This could be the loss of a job, a health challenge, or a period of isolation. When the busyness that once defined us recedes, it can expose foundations we had forgotten, buried dreams, unresolved feelings, or a clearer sense of what truly provides sustenance. Just as archaeologists find both grand temples and simple tools in the mud, our personal droughts can reveal both our deepest strengths and our unmet needs. The process is rarely comfortable, but it can be clarifying, forcing a reorganization of priorities from the ground up. This metaphor scales powerfully to our societies. Consider the recent global health crisis. It acted like a sudden, severe drought on the river of daily life. As normalcy receded, it exposed stark vulnerabilities in our systems, the fragility of supply chains, the inequalities in healthcare access, and the profound importance of community connection. It revealed which parts of our social infrastructure were resilient and which were built on shaky ground. In a similar way, social movements around the world have drawn back the water on historical rivers, bringing to the surface stories and injustices that were deliberately buried or overlooked. The uncovering of unmarked resting places near former residential schools, for example, is a heartbreaking societal parallel to a drought-exposed memorial site. A painful truth rising from the ground after being submerged by silence for generations. These are not discoveries in the sense of finding something entirely unknown, but revelations of what was always there, waiting for the conditions to be right for it to be seen. On a planetary scale, the climate crisis itself is the ultimate drought, and what it is uncovering is the fundamental truth of our interconnectedness and our impact. The receding glaciers and falling reservoirs are the physical symptoms, but they reveal the underlying narrative of a global economic system in conflict with ecological limits. The ancient riverbeds show us civilizations that faced similar, though slower, ecological reckonings. Their exposed canals and abandoned fields are a testament to the end of a particular conversation with nature. Our modern crisis is uncovering the urgent need to begin a new one. So, what is the value of this metaphorical lens? It reframes the act of discovery from passive observation to active interpretation. It suggests that the unease we feel when confronted with these images, of a church in a drained reservoir or a village in cracked mud, might stem from a subconscious recognition. We see our own potential futures, our own buried histories, and our own fragile systems in those sun-baked stones. The philosophical insight is that uncovering is not an end, but a beginning. It presents a choice. We can look at the exposed past, acknowledge what has been revealed, and then consciously decide what to rebuild, what to preserve, and what to change. The lost river valleys teach us that societies can respond to revelation with rigidity or with adaptation. The metaphor asks us, as individuals and as a civilization, which path we will choose as our own waters recede and our foundations are laid bare for all to see. A mosaic of resilience lies before us, pieced together from the broken pottery and dry riverbeds of a dozen vanished worlds. From the Waite to the Roman sluice gate, each fragment tells part of a larger story about human endurance. After exploring these specific cases, a crucial synthesis emerges, revealing not just how these societies fell, but more importantly, how some endured, transformed, and carried on. The unifying question is this: what core principles allowed certain communities to navigate the ultimate stress test of a dying river? Resilience theorists like Carl offer a modern lens for these ancient puzzles. He describes resilient systems as those that can absorb disturbance, reorganize, and continue developing without losing their essential identity. Applying this to the past, we see a pattern. The societies that displayed long-term resilience shared several critical traits, each a lesson etched in stone and silt. The first lesson is diversification. Reliance on a single source of water or a single crop created profound vulnerability. The Indus Valley cities, dependent on the twin pillars of the Indus and rivers, faced catastrophe when one pillar crumbled. In contrast, societies that combined river water with groundwater from wells, rainwater harvesting from cisterns, and diverse food sources from varied landscapes were buffered against shock. They had a portfolio of resources, so the failure of one did not mean the end of everything. The second lesson is flexible social structure. Highly centralized, top-down systems, where all power and decision-making flowed from a distant capital, often proved brittle. When the drought hit, the rigid bureaucracy could be slow to respond, and its legitimacy evaporated along with the water. The Akkadian Empire, with its need for constant agricultural tribute from the provinces, fractured under this strain. Meanwhile, more networked or decentralized societies, like the later ancestral communities, could make local decisions quickly. If one canyon's spring failed, a family or clan could make the choice to move to a relative settlement in another area without waiting for permission from a far-off priest-king. This agility was a survival superpower. The third lesson is embedded ecological knowledge. This is not just about engineering, but about a deep, generational understanding of a place. The who captured flash floods in Petra, or the Andean communities who read the signs of impending drought in specific cloud patterns, possessed a science of survival woven into their culture and stories. This knowledge allowed for anticipatory adaptation, making small adjustments year after year before a crisis became catastrophic. When that knowledge was lost, or when a new ruling class imposed foreign agricultural practices without understanding local limits, the disconnect from the land could be fatal. We see this starkly in the contrast between two ways of life: Consider the mobile pastoralist societies of the Eurasian steppe or the Saharan fringe. Their entire culture was built around flexibility, moving herds to follow seasonal water and grass. When a struck, their response was ingrained. They moved farther or changed their migratory circuit. Their resilience was in their motion. Now, place them beside a massive, centralized agrarian empire like the Khmer at Angkor. The empire's brilliance was its ability to fix water in place, to create a static, engineered landscape of stunning productivity. But when the climate swung violently between drought and flood, that very fixity became a trap. The system could not pick up and move. It was designed for one reality, and when that reality changed, the cost of maintaining the complex infrastructure became unsustainable. The empire's subjects didn't vanish, but they eventually voted with their feet, dispersing to more flexible lifeways along the Mekong. So what does this ancient mosaic suggest for our modern communities, our own vast, interconnected systems? It invites a reflective audit. How are our own water and food sources? How much local agency and flexibility is built into our response plans for climate shocks? And crucially, what vital ecological knowledge might we be overlooking in our pursuit of technological control? The past suggests that resilience is rarely about building a higher, stronger wall against change. It is about cultivating the ability to bend, to adapt, and to transform when the river you have always known decides to flow somewhere else. These fragments of lost worlds are not just relics, they are a field guide for navigating an uncertain future, reminding us that the most enduring civilizations were not the strongest, but the most adaptable. Two images are placed side by side, and for a moment they are indistinguishable. On the left, the cracked, white mud of a 21st century reservoir. On the right, the sun-baked ruins of a city exposed by drought 1,000 years ago. The pattern is the same, only the calendar is different. This is the urgent, unavoidable lesson rising from every dry riverbed we have walked together. The forces that reshaped or reorganized those ancient societies are not relics of a distant past. They are active agents in our present, and we are now their chief engineers. As historian and activist Dr. Shiva has articulated, the separation between nature and human society is an illusion, one that is crumbling under the weight of evidence. We are part of the same system, subject to the same hydrological rules. The warning etched in the sediment is direct. We are not immune. The parallels are not poetic, they are operational. First, over-reliance on single, massive water sources. The Mesopotamians depended on the Tigris and Euphrates, the Khmer on the monsoon pulse captured in there. We replicate this in concrete, with millions dependent on the Colorado River, the Nile, or a handful of overdrafted aquifers. When these single points of failure are stressed, the entire system trembles. Second, soil degradation. The Sumerians saw their fields turn to salt from irrigation. Today, we see the same process in California's Central Valley, where intensive agriculture has drawn down aquifers to historic lows and left salts accumulating in the soil, a modern echo of an ancient problem. Third, the removal of natural buffers. Deforestation in the ancient Maya hinterlands likely altered local rainfall patterns. Our global clearing of forests for agriculture and development performs the same function on a planetary scale, reducing the land's ability to retain moisture and regulate climate. Finally, social inequality, which reduces collective resilience. In stressed ancient societies, the burden of famine rarely fell on the elite in their walled compounds first. Today, the impacts of water scarcity and climate disruption are disproportionately felt by the most vulnerable communities worldwide, fracturing the social cohesion needed for a unified, adaptive response.
Yet our moment holds critical differences, a double-edged sword of our own making. Our global and technological power are unprecedented. They can be tools for profound solution, enabling the sharing of drought-resistant crops, financing large-scale solar desalination, or modeling climate impacts with stunning accuracy. But these same forces can also amplify risk. A drought in one breadbasket region can spike food prices globally through instant markets. Our complex supply chains can transmit a local water shock into economic turmoil continents away. Our technology allows us to delay the consequences, to pump water from deeper and deeper aquifers, giving the illusion of abundance while borrowing from a future that cannot pay it back. This is the core dilemma. We have the knowledge to see the crisis coming, a privilege no ancient society possessed. But we also have the capacity to create crises of a speed and scale they could never have imagined. So which path does this knowledge compel us to choose? The image of the split screen is a choice. One path leads to the left side of the frame, where our modern infrastructure becomes the future's archaeology, a puzzle for some distant civilization to piece together. The other path learns from the right side of the frame, from the adaptability, the diversification, and the deep respect for limits that allowed cultures to endure even when their grandest projects did not. This is not a prophecy, it is a prognosis. The diagnosis is clear, written in the strata of lost river valleys across the world. The treatment plan is in our hands. Will we use our global connectivity only to spread the shock or to spread the solution? Will we use our technology only to dig deeper wells or to design a wiser relationship with the water we have? The next chapter of this story is not waiting to be uncovered by some future drought. We are writing it now with every policy, every innovation, and every conscious choice about what we value and what we are willing to preserve. The bond between civilization and water is written in the mud of forgotten rivers, a story of both creation and fragility. From the ghostly grids of cities to the intricate canals of Angkor, each revelation teaches us that our greatest achievements are often a conversation with the environment, a dialogue that can falter when we stop listening. These are not simply tales of collapse, but profound records of human ingenuity, of communities adapting, migrating, and sometimes making miscalculations on a grand scale. They show us that sustainability is not a modern innovation, but an ancient and hard-won necessity. The severe droughts reshaping our world today are doing more than threatening our future. They are illuminating our past with a clarity we have never possessed before, handing us a library of survival strategies at the very moment we need them most. These uncovered civilizations urge us to listen, to learn from the choices etched in the dry earth. They ask us to value flexibility over rigid control, diversification over reliance on a single source, and deep knowledge of place over short-term mastery. As our climate continues to change, these windows into history may open wider, offering more lessons if we are humble enough to receive them. Let these silent stones and empty canals be our guides, reminding us that the most enduring legacy is not the monument we leave behind, but the wisdom we choose to carry forward. Thank you for exploring these depths with us. If this journey through time resonated with you, please subscribe for more content that bridges past and present, and share your thoughts on these urgent lessons in the comments below.